I'm going to go ahead and share a few things just again, if this is the first time or just to help placehold where we are in our network offerings. Today you are here for our August 6th webinar 3. Previously, we hosted two other webinars, both of which are postings. The recordings are posted on the webpage, and we're excited to have you watch those. If you are new and just joining us new, we encourage you to watch those. And again, join us for August 16th for our 4th in the series of webinars we'll be hosting. We will be hosting another series of small group discussions. We're looking at August 20th currently, and we'll be sharing more details about those when we see you next week. Similarly, we'd like you to hold September 17th, at which time we hope to begin our peer-to-peer learning community. And this is really your opportunity to come back together, to hear from peers, and to share additional problems of practice, resources, etc. So we're looking forward to transitioning from the webinar series to a little bit more time for you all to do more sharing. So we're excited about that as well. With that, I'm going to just turn it back over to Dr. Bob Belfans. He's our director of the Everyone Graduates Center at the School of Education at Johns Hopkins University, who will lead us through a presentation before we move on. Dr. Belfans.
Thanks, Jen. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be back with you today. Today, we're going to continue as we work through the core parts of sort of the systematic approach to address the scale and intensity of the attendance challenge, which is to believe improvements possible, then to know your challenge. And again, today we're going to focus on organizing your response. Next slide. Just to recap, in our first section, we laid out the elements of a comprehensive plan, which involves, as we said, understanding your challenge, organizing your response, gathering and aligning your resources. In our second session, we're really focused on the idea of prevention and creating a culture of attendance, specifically through the idea of both school connectedness and family communication and engagement. And I encourage you, if you missed one of those, to go back and watch them on the website on tape. Today, we're going to really focus on another key element of organizing your response, which is really, in order to have a prevention, problem-solving, mitigation approach, you really need to have district and school teams driving the action, and they need to be using actionable data to drive their actions. It's sort of the air traffic controllers, right, of this work. So we're going to dive into that today. Teams and data. Next slide. All right. So when we're thinking about teams, attendance teams, or however we want to call them, student success teams, a couple things to consider is that historically, the number of folks in a school who were directly involved with attendance was often one or two people, right? Maybe an attendance clerk, maybe an assistant principal that really had attendance under their command, or maybe an attendance coordinator. And that can work if it's a relatively small number of kids they have to deal with. But as soon as we get above 75 kids and maybe even 50 kids, the idea of having one or two people being able to figure this all out just doesn't work. And the challenge we know from the data, right, is that post-pandemic, many schools have 100 or 200 or even more students chronically absent, totally overwhelming sort of that traditional attendance team response. So we have to really remember we've got to create teams that work for the scale of the challenge we face now. And then the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that historically, our student support teams at both the district and the school level were often siloed and focusing, if we go to the next slide, on a sort of single dimension of student need and not again designed for the scale and scope of post-pandemic needs, right? So, right, we might have a PBIS team focusing on behavior, an MTSS team focusing on academic interventions. Maybe you're getting our one or two person attendance team. We have some counselors, maybe some college readiness if we're a high school. You might be doing some early warning on track system to keep kids on track to graduate. All important, but all one dimensions of the challenges our students face, which are much more holistic. And the idea is, how do we bring all those people together into one unified sort of attendance/student success team? So instead of having one or two people, we could have 6 or 7 or 8 people with diverse perspectives coming together to help address these attendance challenges and their implications. So next slide. So again, right, how do we create teams for post-pandemic times, right? The idea is at a school level, the team should include everyone with a key perspective on student attendance. That includes the academic side, so the MTSS folks, but also teachers, right? Because, right, a lot of avoidance, which we know drives chronic absenteeism, is often involves a single subject or a single part of the school day that only one teacher might be cued in about. And they have to be able to share that insight so people can figure, why is it the student not coming? Folks involved in behavior, PBIS, counselors, administrators have to be at the table. Folks involved with well-being, social workers and community school coordinators, right? They've all got to come together to address this attendance challenge. Similarly, district teams should include everyone, every office that has to have an impact on attendance, right? Not just a narrow few people. And when we bring these teams, more collective teams together, we really need to have a consistent schedule where they have time to work together, at least bi-weekly. We need some protocols to help focus the work and leadership endorsement and support. Next slide. When we have this team together, what do? Well, they really have to use data to shape and refine their actions, right? Too often we sort of feel like, oh, we know why our kids don't come. We know what needs to be done. And sometimes that's true and sometimes that's not. And as we saw before, we were talking about knowing your challenge. You know, if we guess wrong about these reasons or what's driving it, right, at best we've wasted our efforts and at worst we made things worse. So we really need that data to help us figure out really what's going on. And then these teams also have got to take part of their responsibility is to help implement and progress monitor our prevention and mitigation strategies, right? You know, the ones that are tracking, are our kids connected to school? How can we get them more connected? The ones tracking, do we have family engagement? How can we improve it? Or, you know, how can we use, you know, tutoring or peer mentoring or all kinds of things to mitigate the impacts of when kids are we're improving but still missing too much school. They've also got to, you know, do this problem solving by getting to the root cause. You know, when that prevention is not enough, there's still kids that are not missing. They've got to really pool the insights from students, from families. That's another role for this team, to really get at that root cause. And then they need to seek strategic partnerships, right, for where they need additional capacity to meet those identified needs. And so you can see these teams are central, and for them to do all this work, they've got to be big enough and involve everybody that has insight into the problem. Next slide. This just, again, one more time, just to break through the actions of these teams and just a slightly different way to look at it, right? So we bring everybody, all hands on deck, you know, leaders, teachers, counselors, all kinds of support staff, meeting regularly, empowered to take action. They're progress monitoring all kids, right, on these key indicators of attendance, but also looking at behavior and school connectedness and well-being, because it's all connected, right? One thing gives you insight into the other. They're then gathering insights and co-creating improvement actions with students, with families. They're saying, what's the most strategic point to intervene? Is it the classroom? Is it a grade level? Is it the school? Where does the data tell us we can have our biggest impact? And then they're trying to, you know, is this working? And if it's not working, they keep changing it until it does work. With really this key goal is to create the conditions under which students thrive, right? As opposed to being reactive and saying, what do we do once bad things are happening? It's really about how can we create a system that enables all our students to thrive by just doing these cycle of actions. Next slide. But for those teams, as we said, to really be able to do their job, they need data, and they need actionable data and effective data. Not because oftentimes we have data, but it's too much, or it's not the right data, or it's too hard to understand. But for attendance, we know it needs to be real time as possible. We're talking things like weekly at the school level, at least monthly at the school district, to stay on top of the patterns and trends. We have to be able to disaggregate by subgroups and grade, because different grades have different reasons, different things going on. It's not always going to be the same. Same with subgroups. We need to understand trends over time. Are we getting better or worse for the start of the year? How are we doing the last year? Are there key times of the year we can see by looking at that when we know we really have to have preventive action because we see big dips? If we can get ahead of it and figure out why, right, we can sort of see it, we're able to change it from last year and not have that big dip. And then finally, we have to remember we have to track what we're doing. This is often where we sort of we're just so busy, we have the ideas, let's go do them, and we don't take that final 5 minutes just to record what we decided to do, so we can later on check, did it happen and did it work? And without being able to answer those questions, we cannot really keep improving our efforts. Next slide. So really, what data should we be looking at, right? This detailed attendance data, days and percent of school year missed to date, right? So we can really stay ahead of it. And we're not saying where you don't do anything until you get to 10 days or 20 days. It's if you're trending towards it, we want to do something. And also another key group of students here, you can see when you have that level of data, is students who have in the past have not been chronically absent and are now trending towards it. That's a very important group because that tells you something has just recently happened in that student's life, either in school or out of school, that's making them now miss school when they haven't in the past. And the sooner you can get and understand that and address that, the better you'll be. And you can only do that if you can look at your data in very detailed levels and say, aha, this is a student that's been doing fine in prior years, but now isn't. Let's figure out what's going on. And as we said, it includes these other types of data as well, are really important to figure out that holistic picture of what's going on and what might work the best. All right, next slide. All right, now we get to hear from you. We're going to ask everybody just to take a short poll and help us understand the types of data, attendance data you currently have access to. All right. So our first question is, in your district, can school staff access close to real-time chronic absenteeism data on each student, i.e. what percent are enrolled days that they missed for any reason year to date? So when you get a chance, just please put your poll results in, and then there's a series of 2 or 3 more questions which follow. Can you analyze patterns and trends? Can you track implementation? And are you satisfied with the data you have or not? And just in a minute, we'll give you 1 more minute to put your data in there so we can learn from each other, and we'll see what we have. If you're able, please and if you know, please put your answers in so we can get as complete a picture as possible from our community here.
Starting to slow down here. Thanks for your responses.
Okay.
Getting high. We got about 88% have answered, which is good. Got
good.
some facilitators who actually probably can't take the poll. So
okay. All right. So we see largely that our network has access, that school staff can access real-time chronic absenteeism data on each student. That's great.
Can you see that, Bob?
Yes.
The whole results? Wonderful.
Yes. We can see that 75% say you can look at patterns and trends. That's fantastic. We see that about half of you are saying you can actually track implementation and impact of improvements. So that's an area for improvement, right? Again, we're saying we need to know if what we're doing is if we're actually doing it and it works. And then finally, 49% say they're not fully satisfied with the data they have and its usability. And about 42% say they do. So that's more of a 50-50 scenario. So we seem to say that data access is there. We can even look at patterns and trends in most cases. Less able to track interventions. But overall, we're even a little more unsatisfied than satisfied with just the total amount of, the access to and the usability of the information we can get on attendance. So thank you. That's very helpful, and it really sets up our next part, where we're going to hear from some districts, right, that are taking steps to try to address some of these challenges. But before we do, sorry, got one step ahead. We just want to share two tools and resources, right, you can use in this area. First, I just want to show you an example of this is from San Diego County. We're going to hear from San Diego Unified in a minute. This is from San Diego County. So we have 2 greater San Diego examples today. But I'm just showing this because it's a very nice example of a dashboard that combines that basic attendance data over time, but also compared to last year. So you could easily see by month for this cohort of schools, how they're doing this year by month and how it compares to last year. But you could see, and it's also updated every day. This is school day 134. This data is for. It shows us our total impact of chronic absenteeism, how many kids are missing, how many days. But then it also gives us our intervention information, right? It's showing you how many nudge letters have been sent, how many postcards, how many team meetings, how many coaching events, and what's the cumulative impact of that year to date compared to prior. So just an example of how you could combine data on the impact, data on the trends, and data on what interventions you're doing and their cumulative effect. Next slide. Another useful tool we're giving you, and when you get the slides after we send you afterwards, or here you can click on the QR code to get to it, is from a GRAD Partnership, a group that's working together to implement student success systems, has created a team reflection tool that student support teams can use to ask, how are we doing in 4 key areas: relationships, data, interventions, and mindsets, and can use that to sort of as a means of continual improvement. If we go to the next slide, you can see that the second section is on holistic real-time actionable data. And what this gives you in each section is a series of guiding questions schools can ask themselves, some potential data to look at to answer those questions, and some look-fors. So it's just a way to sort of see, what do we have? And then there's an action planning tool at the end that helps us, like, what steps can we do now? What might take a while to build consensus? What might take a longer while to build understanding? It's just a way to sort of do some, quick guiding questions to see where you're at and where you can make some improvement actions in using holistic real-time actionable data. All right, next slide. Now we're getting ready to hear from our districts, but before we do, Jen is going to talk about our breakout groups for the day.
Thanks, Dr. Bob, so much. And, again, before we hear from our districts, one thing that we wanted to do was give you sort of a choose your own adventure opportunity to talk with your peers. And so to do that, we need to take care of some housekeeping, which is, if you would take a look at your 2 choices for topics today. Right, we're inviting folks to change their name to the number 1. If you're interested in wanting to talk really specifically about the data, you just saw a data dashboard from San Diego County. You could talk a little bit more or share more about the data that you're using specifically to organize for success. So choose one if you could, and you can do that now. And then of course, if you'd rather talk specifically about attendance teams and the idea of teaming, coaching, supporting those teams, we would invite you to select number 2 for your breakout group. And naturally, these things kind of are intertwined, but we wanted to sort of try to focus the conversation in one of these 2 places for today. So thank you for starting to change. I see some folks changing. We appreciate that. Go ahead and, the 3 dots above your picture should give you the chance to rename yourself, and you should be able to add a 1 or 2, or just replace your name with a 1 or a 2 for us. And we appreciate that. You have a little bit more time to do that, but I am going to change the screen. So last chance to know which ones are for 1 and which ones are for 2 here. Also seeing the chat, I appreciate. Great. Okay, cool. Well, I'm thrilled to be able to introduce our first district, Good Strategies at Work. Really excited to have with us Naomi Tolentino Miranda. Naomi works for Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools, and she is the coordinator for student support programs, including their hallmark program called Attend to Achieve. And so that is, she's going to talk to us more about their efforts, particularly as it relates to the teaming aspects. But welcome, Naomi, to come off camera, to come off mute,
Thank you,
and
thank you.
take it away.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity just to share a little bit about what we're doing here in KCKPS. I do want to start just really quick. I'm going to go fast on these two slides, but you will have this information. If at the end you need more information, we'll share my contact info. Please do not hesitate to reach out. Collaboration has been key for us. So I want to make sure that we can also help as many districts as we can. But just to give you a little bit of context, KCK Public Schools, we are the second largest district in the state of Kansas. We're a very diverse district. We have over 65 languages, which represent the ethnicity and the diversity of who we are. So looking a little bit of like who we are as a district, we are a large district. We have 47 campuses, including early childhood to high school. So maybe you have a larger district than that, but for us, it's a pretty large district. So, talk a little bit about what are some of the things that we have implementing here. So, next slide. So, looking at our data, definitely, as many of us, the pandemic hit us hard, and we definitely needed to look at the data and look at what we're missing, what do we need to do to address chronic absenteeism. So, this is just a quick snapshot of our data from 2019 to last year, 2024. We still have a lot of work to do, but I will tell you that it's been definitely making a difference. The fact that we've been spending time and energy and resources to look at chronic absenteeism, understand chronic absenteeism, and looking at what are the strategies that work for us, right? And we heard from a lot of districts, and one of the things that we saw is that not everything that works for some will work for us. So really had to dig deep on our data. Next slide, please. So to talk a little bit about where we are right now, one of the things as a district is that we look at what are some of the challenges that we had, why the data was telling us that, why we're telling us why the data was telling us the chronic absenteeism was so high. So a few things, didn't have a way to look at data. We did not have a data dashboard that looks at chronic absenteeism. We were looking at everything else, but not a chronic absenteeism. We definitely have no system to identify attendance trends, right? We have our teams, our buildings have little to no plan for to plan about attendance and engagement. And key theme was we did not have a foundational support in place to address attendance. So looking at that, we created a partnership with Attendance Works and a few other organizations to help us like look at the data and get the support that we needed and created a approach that will provide coaching, training, and data monitoring for our team. So that's a little bit of how we got to where we are. Again, I can talk more about that later if you want, but I want to talk a little bit about what does that look like, right, for our building. So next slide, please. There you go. So to talk a little bit about what happened, so we um after identify the challenges, we look at the implementation and what we needed to implement in KCKPS. So we look at using the trauma sensitive social emotional learning MTSS framework to address some of our attendance concern. So what that looks like is that we one started creating professional development. We realized that we as a district, first we leadership needed to learn about what is chronic absenteeism, what is the cause, what is happening, what is the research telling us that is a chronic absenteeism. So we partnered again with Attendance Work to provide professional development for district leadership, for our principals, and for our buildings. After looking at that, then we moved to do our implementation of attendance team in building. Um, Looking at implementation of the team building, Dr. Bob mentioned a lot of the things that we use. So I'm gonna try to be specific about us. So our district had a lot of teams that were looking at data and had a lot of teams that were looking at attendance, but they were not looking at the detail. And I think Dr. Bob mentioned this, like you really need to look when you're looking at attendance, you need to dig deep, right? And look at what is really the data is telling you. So we noticed that we have a bunch of teams that were looking at data, but none of them were really focusing on attendance. So we talked to our buildings and say we need to definitely establish an attendance team at each building. Now, that can be one of the teams that you already have. It doesn't have to be a new team, but it's going to designate a specific time to just look at attendance data. That was a key difference. And I think that was something that really helped us as a district, making sure that we look at the teams that we already have instead of just starting to create a new teams. So for example, a lot of our teams have a behavioral health team that we're looking at behavior, we're looking at discipline, but they were not looking at attendance. So that team then designated a time just to look at attendance. So they were also or attendance team. So they look at like, what do you have right now? What do you have that is working? Which teams are looking? So those teams were established at each one of our 47 buildings. We work with 20 schools first, and then for 2 years, and then the third year we work with our other 20 schools. And now, when they started, like we established the team, but now what, right? As a district, we realized that we needed to give them tools to be successful. So two things that we asked those teams to do is one, we asked them to start looking at those foundational supports and those positive conditions for learning that make sure that is that happening in your school. So that was one part of the things that we asked that we're asking our teams to do. But the second one is we need to spend time looking at attendance data. So we as a district need to give you the tools, right? So we have to create a dashboard for them to look at data, chronic absenteeism data, but we also needed to give them the tools to interpret that data. So one of the tools that we used was the social emotional learning data reflection protocol. And this one is an adapted LS. We did not create it. We adapted it from the data protocol from the National School Reform Faculty Harmony Educational Center, and we share that resource. But this is just a way that help us supports equity of voice and allows all members to describe the data that make inference and share implications for future work. So that helps us just look at the data with the equity lens and look like what's happening, what's missing, what's not working, which groups are not are needing more support than others, and then make sure that we're using that data to provide intervention. So those are the two things that we ask our attendance teams to do. Look at positive condition for learning and then look at data. But we also knew they couldn't do it alone. So we decided that we are going to be going and support that. And we call our coaching meetings. So we provided to each one of our buildings the time to have those supports, someone come to them. So or attend to achieve team, the team that used to be the truancy team, but shifted from the punitive approach to a preventive approach in our school. They attend to a shift team in our district. That team will go to the buildings and help lead those conversations. That definitely has make a difference. We also created a different resources as a district. We created the attendance guide. That again, we're going to share all those resources. But the attendance guide is also one place that has all the information that the teams need to be successful. It has not just our guidelines, but also have the social and emotional learning approach to address attendance. It has suggested tier intervention. It has resources. It has a bank of all the tiers interventions that we have at our district and give them the tool to then, okay, we're looking at data, we're looking at foundational support. Okay, now what do we do, right? What do we do with that? Now they have a bank through the attendance guide of interventions that they can apply using a data and they can make database decisions. So I think that's my time. It's like, oh, so much information. I can keep talking, but I just very briefly, again, you can have my information and we can share more a little bit of the work that we are doing. Jen, does that cover everything that you wanted me to cover? It's like I can keep talking.
Oops, I think I muted you by accident. Let's unmute you.
That's
There we
okay.
go.
I got the cue.
No, no, no. I was trying to unmute myself. That was so funny. No,
Funny.
Naomi, I really appreciate you
Uh-huh.
sharing a really bite-sized opportunity. And also, I think that to the degree that you're comfortable, you can share your contact information
Yeah.
as well as I think there's some really great things that are in that handbook, the attendance guide that was just put in the chat. And if not, the data protocol is there that Kansas City adapted for their own, as well as a tool to take notes. I think there's a lot when you're thinking about your attendance teams, Naomi, that you were able to share. One quick question before we turn to John. You
Absolutely.
mentioned your approach was could you clarify again
Mhm.
that you started with how many and how long of
Yeah.
a how long did it take you to sort of launch this full vision?
Absolutely. So we just completed year 3. So the first year we did planning, a lot of conversation, looking at data as a district level with attendance work and other experts in the building, in the area. So we spent half of the first year, and then we selected the first 20 schools. So we did half of the schools, and we used the state identification. So we look at the schools that have the highest discrepancy around behavior, attendance between groups to identify which needed that support. Then the second year, because we didn't have a full year with them, we continued with those 20 schools, providing monthly coaching support, making sure that they understand chronic absenteeism. We provide professional development through the year, and then that monthly coaching to those 20 schools. And then last year we did and then started with the other 20 schools, making sure that they're receiving the professional development. Again, we partner with attendance work to lead those professional development, and then my team, me and my team, then provide that, facilitate that coaching, a monthly coaching with attendance teams. Hmm.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that was really helpful to
Yes,
just clarify that piece. It didn't
absolutely.
happen overnight. It didn't
It did
happen
not,
overnight.
and we still
Yeah,
have a lot of work to do. I was here taking notes, but Dr. Bell was like, "Oh yeah, that's exactly what we're meeting." I think where we are right now is like we're missing that. Okay, how do we track that intervention? And that's what we're working then this year. Absolutely,
great.
but yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much,
of
Naomi.
course.
I appreciate your time. So we have a second example for you before we split into groups and more links to share as well. I'd like to introduce John Ross. John is the program manager and placement and appeal for San Diego Unified School District. You saw a cool dashboard for their state initiative, ICANN, and I think John's going to talk a little bit more about San Diego Unified's adoption of that same program, as well as a little bit more about the data in this early launch period. You ready, John?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So good afternoon, everybody. 2 years ago, shortly after I started in this role, our district created like a new position called Family Services Assistants, or FSA for short. Those positions are specifically designed to go into schools to help with attendance-related issues and to reduce chronic absenteeism. Fast forward to the spring of 2023, I had been in this role for a year. We're wrapping up the school year, and then I get a invitation from the San Diego County Office of Ed about identifying schools that want to be partnered with them to be in the ICANN program, Improving Chronic Absenteeism Network. That is all about looking at your attendance policies and procedures and structures to help improve attendance and reduce chronic absenteeism. It's a year partnership with the county by school. There is a small cost, but once you have the strategies and all the learnings, you just implement, you continue to implement it year after year, and you should see an improvement in your attendance. The program is for elementary and middle schools, and this year it will be cohort 5. Some of the pros and cons to being in a big district. One of the cons is you don't always know what's going on. When I received this invite in the spring of 2023, I didn't know that 3 of our schools were already in cohort 3. And so that was, kind of interesting. But anyway, 5 of our schools partnered with the county last school year. We have 182 school sites, and I really wanted to get more, but I said, you know what, I'm gonna go with this 5. They started the program during the summer. They started meeting with the staff, started meeting with the administrators. Myself and some of the FSAs attended all those trainings, but early on, I was like, I was floored. I was like, you know what, you're preaching to the choir. Prior to coming in this role, I was a site leader, and we were already implementing school attendance teams at our site, and so I was hooked. When we started the training in the fall, I was trying to figure out like, how do I duplicate this for the other 100 and something schools in our district that aren't going to be receiving this training. So my team and I got together. We started to develop our own training within the district, and then we kind of launched that and we offered that to our schools that weren't part of ICANN. Some of the learnings, real quick, on this slide. The first one, the huge impact a school attendance team can have at a site. The second learning, having a tool that's like critical. If you're going to have a school attendance team, like Bob already alluded to it, you got to have a tool. You got to be looking at the data. It's got to be living. You got to be, putting interventions in. Who's going to make a home visit? Who's going to do a phone call? Who's going to make a referral? And then the last one, we focus on nearly chronic because we know those students are on the cusp, and it might just take a phone call, just might take a referral. So we focus on the nearly chronic. Not to say we don't also reach out to our chronic, but we focus on the nearly chronic. Next slide, Jen. So our SIS system is PowerSchool, but one of the other platforms we use is a system called Who Knew It. Who Knew It extracts data from our SIS system each night. So it'll pull like anything that was inputted into the SI system regarding attendance or behavior or assessment, and then it allows you to run these reports. So this is one of our schools, Faye, that was part of ICANN last year. This is their attendance over the last 3 years. The red bands are the chronically absent students. And so if a site administrator or site staff member wanted to click on any of those bands, it's going to automatically pull all those students from that band and give you a list of those students. And so this is great data for our site administrators to pull. And then this can become your list of students that you're going to target and try to re-engage in terms of attendance. This is what that data would look like. So if I clicked on the red band for last year, all these students would come up, and then if you click on each individual student, then it further breaks down the student's data and information, by individual. Next slide. Some of our goals this school year. So one, we want to increase the number of schools that have a school attendance team. And so one of the things we want to do is we want to continue to offer training. So last year we offered 3 trainings. Once we put our ICANN within the district together, we offered 3 trainings. We were only able to hold 2 of those because in January we had like a lot of rain and a lot of our school communities got flooded, and so we had to cancel one of those. So last year we held 2. This year we want to offer 2 in the fall and then 2 in the spring. We want to poll and survey every site administrator at 182 of our campuses to see who has a school attendance team. And then based on that data, we want to set goals. Like I say, if we have 50 schools that have school attendance teams, we might say we want to have maybe 70, 75 or 100 schools by the end of the school year. The survey questions will be simple and quick. First question, does your school have attendance team? Second question, how often does the team meet? Third question, what staff members make up the team? And then does your team use some sort of data tool to monitor progress? We know some of the challenges that we foresee, getting some site administrators to make attendance a priority. We already know that's a challenge, and we're going to try to work through that and try to get as many people on board. Currently, one of the challenges, not knowing how many schools have a school attendance team. I hate that I don't have that data, but that's what I'm going to be working towards obtaining this school year. And then again, I mentioned, we're a big district, but sometimes, we have a small FSA, which is 14 folks. So that is a challenge to try to duplicate, some of the trainings and be at all these different sites. So that is one of the challenges that we recognize. Next slide. So at various campuses in our district, these are some of the staff that serve on our school attendance teams. I will say, again, at my previous site where we had a school attendance team, I know the value in having a school attendance team and the work and the impact that it has. So having an administrator, the lead administrator on that team makes a huge difference. By us having our admin team serve on that school attendance team, like we met weekly. And some sites do every other week, some sites do once a month. I will say from experience, if you're meeting weekly and you have a student that you're trying to re-engage, you're more apt to reach out to that student within a few days because the team just meets weekly. If you meet bi-weekly or if you meet once a month, then you have like maybe 2 weeks that have gone by before someone has reached out to that student. So I find that meeting weekly, you're going to have a greater impact. But again, sites have to do what works for them. Having a teacher on that team, having someone with special ed or 504 knowledge, nurse or health technician, counselor, attendance clerk. I'm not going to go through the list. You guys can see it. But those are just some of the ones that serve on our teams. And it's going to vary from site to site. This is a sample copy of our attendance team tool. We got this one actually from the county. In the slide deck, you'll see some other examples. This is just a real basic generic one. Some of the ones are a little more advanced. They have a number of different categories and columns. But again, as Bob was saying, this was our living document. So each week, every team member, we had it, and it was in form of a Google Doc. And so every team member can log in when they got home and they could see, hey, such and such, the counselor went to the house today, and I see they talked to mom, and mom's going to bring the kid to school tomorrow. So it's a living document. It's going to change. Kids are going to go on there. Kids are going to come off. Like, you're going to make notes. But again, how do you monitor progress if you don't have the data and it's not in real time? These are oh yeah. Okay. So lastly, these are some resources, tools. That Attendance Works is a one-pager. It has some really good information in terms of what a good attendance team is, but there's some definitely good resources there. Feel free to reach out. By all means, we haven't solved it, but we think we're going in the right direction.